Writer Centre event, Writing into Being, Chronicles of Girlhood in Black British Literature. And what I would like to just say at the outset is we are dedicating this to the memory of Josephine Melville, who very sadly died after the first performance of Press Night of Nine Night. And Josephine, or Jo, was a great friend to Goldsmiths. On 2 occasions, she and Roger brought the eye-to-eye marvellous archive all about Black British theatre, incredible posters, videos, ephemera, you name it, and set it up at Goldsmiths painstakingly, and then drove all the way back to Southend afterwards. And she was always such a figure of support and fun, and she memorably, during Diane Abbott's 25 years as an MP celebration that I was honoured to be able to stage here, Jo did a beautiful speech from Shoot to Win, which must be the only play in the world about a girls' netball team. So, so we would just like to pay an homage to Jo's memory.
Yes.
So, first of all, I just want to put this into context because, please come in, because we do have the books that can be signed at the end of the session and some refreshment. So, anticipate that as you listen to our authors.
Bribery.
Yeah. So, Countee Cullen famously asked the question, without a question mark, what is Africa to me, in his poem Heritage. And so it's a question, I would say, that's shared by the works of both of our authors today, Anni Domingo and Juliana Mensah, and in their 2 arresting debut novels. These novels trace the girlhoods of black protagonists across the geographies of Britain, Africa, and beyond, in distinct periods of history. They also show the legacies of enslavement and colonisation as they set the coordinates for their characters' physical and emotional odysseys along diasporic routes into womanhood and longed-for family reunions. We're going to listen to the research that was involved in the work and the narrative techniques that they employ to willfully and wonderfully imagine these girlhoods and experiences which have slipped between the folds of cultural memory, but which both women fashion richly into life. So let me just introduce the 2 authors, and then I will shut up. Anni Domingo.
Hi.
Actress, director, writer, Annie works extensively in radio, TV, films and theatre. She is a pillar of performance history in this country, might I say. Her poems and short stories are published in various anthologies. Her plays are produced in the UK. Her debut novel is Breaking the Maafa Chain, which was published in September last year and then in paperback September this year. An extract from the novel won the Myriad Editions First Novel competition, and she's also a magistrate for Cambridgeshire. So, Juliana J.A. Mensah is a prose and theatre writer and a lecturer in English and creative writing at the University of York. Her short stories have recently appeared in the Book of Newcastle, Press, New Narratives for the North East, New Writing North, and Test Signal, Dead Ink and Bloomsbury. Her debut novel, Castles from Cobwebs, by Saraband, publisher, was longlisted for the 2021 Desmond Elliott Prize and won the inaugural Northbound Book Award. So, Breaking Maafa Chain draws upon the life of Sarah Forbes Bonetta, Queen Victoria's goddaughter, and it is the catalyst for the tale of 2 sisters, Salamatu and Fatmata, who are sold into enslavement and forcibly sent to separate parts of the world. By the time, as Annie writes, the HMS Bonetta arrived in England, Salamatu was disappearing and she was becoming Sarah, as she ends up in the court of Queen Victoria. Castles from Cobwebs unfurls the life of Imani, who, rescued as a baby, is raised by nuns on a remote Northumbrian island in a convent. As she grows up feeling an ever-increasing sense of displacement, she receives a telephone call that takes her to Accra and forever changes her life. In a temporally fluid narrative, where young Imani can be in dialogue with an older Imani and the shadow figure of Amari, this inhabits Amani's reality, and it's a discovery of two parallel worlds of faith and spirituality which vie for each other as Amani traces the footsteps of her life. So the first, I guess, question I'd like to ask both of you is about the form you have chosen for your novels, because you break up the kind of prose narrative with all kinds of texts, be they letters, be they diary entries, an email, italics. We have the three little images that break up your text as we read it. So I wondered what were your impetuses in breaking up this sense of narrative flow so that the reader gets held in some way? Juliana.
Writing this book took a long time, and I think I tried to write it in many different ways, so it took many different forms. And at some point in the writing process, I realised that it's not a linear narrative. It could be written in a linear way, but there is a trauma that is so deep that happens at the beginning that shatters everything, our memory, our connection with our histories. And I wanted the text to represent that in some way. And I also didn't want to allow readers an easy way into it. So it's written in 3 books, and the first book is fragments, and it jumps around in time quite a bit. And the feedback that I've had from some readers is that actually it's quite jarring, and that's intentional. It's not supposed to be an easy read initially, because what the protagonist is working through is something that she doesn't understand, and she is deciphering and picking up bits about who she is and her identity and her history, and that's a painful process. So there was no way to write it to make it palatable for the reader.
And so what about your unsettling ways, Annie, with the text?
Again, mine isn't linear, so it jumps around. But very early on, Sarah, or the child who became Sarah, was captured when she was only 4. And I really wanted to find out what her life had been like before she became a slave. And we know that her parents were killed and that she had siblings, but we don't know what happened to the siblings. So I fictionalized an older sister who could tell us about their life in the village as these daughters of a chief. And I wanted the language of that to be different, and for Salimata, who became Sarah, to try to find her way, but there's always sort of having to go backwards and forwards. So she as she became more and more English, she started to try to get back. And one way I did it was in 4 sections. And in the first section, when they're in Africa, it has each chapter has an epigraph that is in Yoruba, which is a Nigerian language, and had the meaning. And I know that people won't be able to read it, but the idea is that when they look at it, their eye knows that it is a different place, even if they can't read it. They can read the meanings. And also, I wanted, as Sarah became more and more involved in England, for her to find a different way. So her epigraphs are in Proverbs. Fatmata's epigraph, when she becomes a slave, is the Bible, but in the Gullah Bible. So the Gullah people are the only Black Americans who have a language, and it's in the Gullah language. And these were people who were taken from Africa, especially around the Sierra Leone area, to South Carolina as slaves, because they were experts at growing rice, and rice was South Carolina gold at that time. So there's very different reasons, and each epigraph has to do with something that happens or the flavor of the chapter. And the last bit was Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which is
and David Copperfield.
David Copperfield. The epigraphs are David Copperfield, but she talks about Christmas Carol. I'm a huge Charles Dickens fan, so that had to come in. But the main reason why it was about the Christmas Carol was because it talks about ghosts and spirits, and that sort of connects to what the child remembers about ghosts and spirits. So each section had a different reason, and in between that you had diary entries, which became letters, because that is very sort of a Victorian period way of communicating. There were no emails, so that was the reason that was happening. So those were different sections and different ideas that had a flow through.
And before we...
Sorry, can I comment on something you've just said?
Yeah.
I found it really interesting what you said about putting Yoruba into the book, into the text, because one of the things I wanted to do and struggle to do, because I only speak English, I'm not multilingual or bilingual, is have texts that at points deliberately keep the English language speaker out, because English culture keeps different people out in different ways, and also English texts in different ways because of their references, because of a whole host of things, can lock readers who aren't predominantly British out.
Yeah.
And various writers play around with different languages so that the reader understands certain things, and bilingual and multilingual readers understand other aspects of it.
I didn't want to put the people who couldn't speak it, because I don't speak Yoruba. I can understand a bit of it, but I don't speak it. I could have chosen a whole lot of different languages. But in the body of the text, you will, from time to time, have an African word, and that is deliberate to remind people and to draw them back into where the start was. I mean, it started off with the title of the book, which is Breaking the Maafa Chain, and Maafa is the Swahili word for African Holocaust, i.e. the slave trade. So immediately people want to know, what does that mean? And the minute you start thinking about that, you start getting away into the book.
And I wondered, you're both mothers, you have mothers of your novels, and yet mothers in your respective novels. We have a convent that is a sort of matriarchal space, but very repressive for Imani. I mean, you describe that she's kept prisoner, and she feels that she is, after she leaves it, she realises it. And I thought the court of Queen Victoria, this sort of mother of the empire, and the way in which Sarah has a very specific role in it. And so when you created these spaces, what were the kinds of limits that you felt might be put around your characters in having to make it plausible for them in the space?
I think that for me, Sarah actually existed, and you know that she was involved with Victoria's court. When you read a lot of Queen Victoria's biographies, you hardly ever hear about Sarah. And yet when you read her diaries, Queen Victoria's diaries, she is mentioned several times. And that was one of the things that hooked me on, because she wrote specifically on the November the 11th, which was her son's birthday, I met my black goddaughter for the first time. And then January 6th, she wrote in her diary, I saw my black goddaughter for the 4th time. And I went, hang about. It's early January, and there was Christmas in between. Why? What was the relationship that made her see this child for 4 times in that short space of time? And in fact, she goes on to call Queen Mama Queen, because to her, she was taken away so young that this woman who seemed to care about her became a sort of a mother figure for her. But she also had other mothers. She had Captain Forbes Bonnetta's wife, became a kind of mother. So.
And you have Mother Superior, of course, in your book.
Yes, I wrote this book before I became a mother, and it's been interesting thinking about that, and it's been the conversation today that has made me think about it most, I suppose. When I was writing it, so the convent is quite a repressive space, but I hope it's also complicated, because there is love there as well, and aspects of her are nurtured and allowed to grow, and others are kind of silenced. And I think there's often there can be those complex relationships with mothers and with homeland. And for me, the convent in many ways represents the home that you're born to. She was left there as a baby and didn't know where she was from. And that's England for me. So in many ways, the convent and the nuns represent the state, and the different ways that they create a place for her and silence her, tell her particular things about who she is. There is a character in the book that is, it's up to the reader to decide how they understand them, but a lot of that character was drawn from me from Ghanaian spirituality, and this idea of sunsum. And sunsum, in a very kind of condensed way of trying to explain it, is the idea that where the body and soul touch, there is a part of divinity that is in all of us. And it's represented as this thing, and Imani, the protagonist, calls it her shadow, but the nuns call it something evil and a demon. And there are all these names put on it, and it makes her question her relationship with this thing and what it is to her. And I was very interested in what aspects of our histories do we carry in ourselves, do we know unconsciously? And it was her trying to connect with that, but it's constantly kind of shut down and silenced. And it's that idea that a home can be a place that is nurturing, but also can do great damage to our souls.
I mean, for me, Queen Victoria seemed nurturing in some ways, and other ways quite alien. The idea that people have about Queen Victoria is that she wasn't a muse, she didn't like children, but the woman had 9, so you can understand that sometimes she just didn't want them around. But when you read her diaries, she did have them around her quite a lot, and I try to make people have just have a think about who Queen Victoria was before she became the widow and that. But even so, you know, there's scenes where some of the things that she says to Sarah, or she allows people to say to Sarah, for example, that she was told she must have her head measured because although she's a bright child, it's known that African children are bright, but as they get older, they get stupid. So you've got to measure now the circumference of her brain to see if it's going to shrink and things like that. And this child not understanding why they think about her that way. And so she always had the two sides of her. So as she becomes Sarah, the child that was Salimatu is pushed, but she has a battle all the way through between her old self and her new self, because that one is the one that had some of the memories and some of the things that she sometimes wants and sometimes she doesn't want. So it's very confusing knowing her place.
Well, before we get to hear you reading from your works, I just thought that process of these girls growing into womanhood is constantly one of disorientation, and what they thought they know keeps getting replaced with something else. And I just wondered how you worked with that as a structure, the idea that this protagonist is never secure in some way.
I think that that's part of the fun as well. It's part of the way that you get caught out yourself. So you think, I never sort of planned the whole thing, but I sort of know where I want to go. But every so often something comes up, or some characters come up, and you think, go away, you're not in my plan. But they keep forcing themselves on you, and eventually you go, okay, come on then, what do you want to say? And that sometimes brings this sort of tension, and you not knowing quite where you're going to go with the character. And they come up with things that sort of pushes them into a different sort of route, and then you have to maybe try to get them back if they're becoming unruly, and you go, no, come back.
Just responding to that, I had an experience with that in one of my rewrites. I got to the end of a redraft, and I found out, me and the protagonist at the same time, found out something about a character that I hadn't planned and I didn't know. And then I had to go back to the beginning and rewrite the whole thing to try to understand why this thing had been kept a secret, and to try to understand it.
They are wily, these
That's
characters.
So Annie, would you like to read for us first?
Okay. So this is the prologue, and I wanted the reader to immediately get into the dichotomy of what was happening to these children. Because at the moment, Sarah was 4 years old when she was captured, and Salimata was 4 years old, and Fatmata, who then becomes Faith, was 14. Stripped of everything but our black skins, our ritual scars, our beings, we are tied together in rows and jammed into another juju pit. Packed in so close, no one can move. We lie on our sides, rough wooden boards hard against our bare skins, rubbing our shoulders raw, chained to the living and to the dead. Now I know what fear smells like. It is the smell of grown men, groaning, sweating, and stinking. Fear is women crying, wailing, and calling on their ancestors to save them and their children, before they are lost to Mamiwata. All around me, chains rattle and whips crack and the sails flap, boards creak and ropes stretch. The noise in the cramped space swirls inside my aching head as it hits the wooden sides of the swaying ship, drumming wild thoughts and dark fears into my mind. I feel the howl of those beside me, those below me, those above me. And they run through my body. The call of the Ochioma bird, the bird of parting, makes my heart pound, holding me tight before fading into the darkness, before leaving me in pain. I sink down and weep in a way I have never wept before in all of my 14 seasons. Aye! Ogun, God of gods, help me! Aye! Through the tears, I see everything that had been. My heart aches for Salimatu, my sister, my mother's child, captured and sold. To the Moors? To the white devils? There, in the back of my eyes, way back, are the spiritless bodies of my mother Aisatu and my father Dauda, now gone to the land of our ancestors, without due honor. I see others too. Maluma, mother of my mother. Lansana, my father's first son, gone too. I fear that Amadou, my father's last son, has also joined the ancestors. I have not seen him since he ran, but now, can he be here, in this pit, this wooden devil's hole, and not know that I am close by? Amadou! Amadou! Son of Chief Dauda of Talaremba, near Okiadon. I cry out again and again. Who calls for Amadou of Talaremba so loudly? That matter, his sister. They didn't get him, he replies. He never stopped running. Santiki and the white man did not have time to chase after him. I recognize the voice. It is Lei, the man who speaks the white man's tongue. The relief I feel flows through my words. Olaron, creator of the Egbadon people, I praise you, I bless you, I thank you. There are loud cries in many tongues from the different tribes of people. Hey, now they will kill us and eat us, says one. We are sacrificed to their gods and to Mamiwata, says another one. The shouts getting louder and louder. Mamiwata? I remember what my grandmother Maluma told me a long time ago. Mamiwata, goddess of water, drags those who disturb her being down into the watery underworld to join the ancestors. Aye! Aye! No, said Lei. This big canoe, this ship, will take us far, far away to be sold to the white man's people. They've done this before, many times. I was once captured, but I escaped and came back to the land of my ancestors a free man. Now, here I am again, tied up a slave once more. I swear to all the gods, I will not go back to that life. I will escape again or die trying. The sound of wailing rises, sucking up what little air there is left. Sorrow fills my nose. In the dark, I feel for my amulet and stroke the heartstone Maluma gave me before she journeyed 2 rainy seasons past. Maluma, who had known all, heard all and seen all, even before she went to join Olorun, the divine creator of the Talaremba people. Maluma, don't leave me, I whisper. They're taking me away, taking me from everything. Help me find my way, for I am afeared. I hear my grandmother's voice. I am no longer alone, no longer afeared that I too would disappear like Jabeza, Lansana, Salimatu. Her words are in the wind that makes the shipboards groan and the flapping wing sails sing. Listen, my child. Fear is in the eyes, in the heart, in the mind. Fear stinks of sweat, rottenness, death. Face your alobita fears and they will disappear. I am with you, my child. I'll always be with you. I am part of you. So I will never be lost. I know I must remember the words that once came with the first cry of the baby and that stays until the last sigh slips out of the spiritless body. I must remember the words hidden in my bones and in the blood that sipped into the ground under the mango trees. I must live so that I can hand the words to my yet-to-be daughters, to my daughter's daughters, to the daughters of my daughter's daughter, down, down, down the time. They will know that the ancestors were around before ships brought the white devil, before our own people sold us, before we knew the sorrow of the Maafa Chain that now binds us, before I became a motherless, fatherless child. No matter where the white man takes me, he cannot steal my roots. Deep inside me, I hear talking drums, calling, shouting out my name. Fatmata, Fatu, Fatu. My words, my thoughts, my life are beaten into my bones, my smell into my flesh for all times. A deep feeling of loss washes over me, drenching me with sadness and sorrow. I try to push away the pain from the raw marks of slavery branded on my left shoulder. Instead, I touch the healing scars of the initiation tattoo I carved on myself and on my sister Salimatu, the monkey tattoo that says no matter where they take us, we are Talarembas and warriors, even if we are girls. Odua Dua, God of all women, help me. I must remember. I will remember. I do remember.
I know, Annie, that you always choose to read this section, and I wondered at what stage of your composing of the work that it started to come together and you knew it was going to open the book.
I knew right from the start that I wanted to write something about that journey, but I did not want to write the typical slave journey of the whipping and I wanted it to just be something that was in a weird way positive for her, that she got her strength, because I knew that she was going to go on and she was going to survive. Because when we think about slavery and we think about what happened, we've also got to remember that those people were bloody strong. Otherwise, they would not have survived. They had their ways of finding a way to survive, whether it was the ones who tried to run away again and again and would have their arms chopped off or whatever, but they would still keep on trying. I wanted that indomitable spirit to be in her, even in that ship, so that we know that we have a strong character even before we start reading about her. The thing is that when the book finished, I then sort of moved everything around. So what is now chapter 1 was at one point chapter 10. so it's part of just writing it and then putting the jigsaw puzzle together to see what fits the story, the arc of the story best.
Juliana.
Follow that. So I'm not going to start at the beginning of the book. I'm going to read 2 short sections. As I mentioned, the book is in 3 parts, and in the first part, she's returning to the island and she sees her past selves. And in the second part, she is waking up in Ghana. So she's had a phone call, and sorry, my glasses are a bit blurry. She's had a phone call that has told her that her biological mother has died.
I just want to sit there so I can see you read.
Sorry. And so she travels to Accra to attend the funeral and to find out about her origins. And this is the first morning in Accra. Chickens cluck and gossip nearby. A car honks in the distance. Someone somewhere shouts a greeting. Wheels screech, several of them successively. I wait for the crash. It doesn't come. Voices rise in confused or angry chorus. A group of children chant a playground anthem. They clap and stamp in sync. I can't make out the words. A soft lap of a skipping rope beats the ground repeatedly. Something hits the window. A ball? I don't move to see. Soupy air rests on my skin, and the sun through the blinds crosses my cheek with a lick of dry heat that is surprisingly refreshing. The crisp light soothes against cloying humidity. I open my eyes and then close them. Open, then close. The ball hits the window again. Close eyes, open, close. I do that thing where your eyes are open behind closed lids. I watch the light filter through the skin that shields my gaze. The back of my eyelids glow ochre, brown. I'm brown again. I'd always known that I was brown. I don't remember it being a discovery. Putting my arm against Sister Alma and noticing the difference between us. Paddling on the beach with Reverend Mother and realising the contrast in our reflections as they rippled in a stream. There was no one moment when I suddenly knew. Amory was blackish grey, and Mother was whitish pink. Amory was spirit, and Mother was flesh. I was brown, somewhere between them, more flesh than Amory, more spirit than Mother. They were my coordinates, and I knew where I was rooted between them. Black was different, though. It came announced. It was the year the parish roof couldn't be repaired anymore. There had been too many patch jobs done. It was like an old quilt, all threadbare and no good at blocking water. The autumn we had the Cayley to raise money for a new roof, and Mrs. O'Shea from the village, Penelope Marie's mum. She told Sister Alma I was a good dancer, because all black people have rhythm. And there it was. Suddenly I was black. After that, there was a world outside with others who were black like me, and this hunger formed. Perhaps it had always been there, as a cloud maybe, but it hardened, became granite in the pit of me. Every time Harold found another morsel about black from Yahoo, I savoured it. But black also made me dizzy. Like when you're little and you spin around, then in the middle of spinning, you realise you can't stop and stand still, and you'll fall over if you try. Black came with expectations, of rhythm, and other things that might trip me up. At Heathrow, there were people of all colours and combinations. I saw a woman, brown like me, with hair the colour of a postbox. A boy, paler than Sister Alma, with black hair down to his knees, silver chains hanging from his wrists, and blue and purple on his eyes. I watched them, ravenously. I wished Amory was there to see it all. I prayed she'd stop being so stubborn and appear. At Kotoka Airport, the faces were all kinds of brown. Chestnut, mahogany, oak, chocolate, terracotta, hazel, copper, gold, umber, rosewood, ebony, coffee, onyx, dusk. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to read another section that Deirdre has asked me to read. And it's from the third section in the book, book 3, where the protagonist travels to America, to the US, and she meets up with a young woman who used to visit the convent. And at one time they believed that the young woman was going to try to train to become a nun, but then she disappeared. So this is their conversation. What made you start coming to St. Teresa's? I'm adopted, she says. She continues eating and seems in no rush to say any more. After a while, I go to ask another question, and before I speak, she continues. Years back, I'd been helping my mum clean out the basement in my folks' old place. In a box, I came across this magazine with an article about unmarried girls in the UK, secretly having babies in these convents. Inside the magazine, beside the article, was this book, a pamphlet, a philosophy of faith, no more than 30 pages, written by Michaela Berwick. Reverend Mother, I whispered, bewildered. Yeah. Melia moves her empty plate aside. She takes out a green rolled packet from her bag and unravels it on the table. Laying a small, thin sheet of paper in front of her, she concentrates on spreading tobacco evenly across it. I was raised Greek Orthodox. But as soon as I was old enough, I let everyone know I didn't believe in anything. I wouldn't be going back to the church, anytime soon. She looks up, halfway into rolling the paper, a question in her eyes. Am I sure I want her to continue? I nod, encouraging her to go on. Reverend Mother's book wasn't mine. It wasn't my parents'. They wouldn't have had it for spiritual purposes, so why was it there? She lights her cigarette and continues. When I was a kid, some older cousins told me that my birth mother was from the UK. I don't know where they got that idea from, but I always remembered it. So I put 2 and 2 together and came up with something more than 4. In the article, one of the women had given birth at around the time I'd been born. She thought the kid had been adopted and taken to America. I read that story and was convinced that she was my birth mom. I became a bit obsessed. I tracked her down to St. Teresa's, and those visits were about getting close to her. Reverend Mother? I asked, holding my breath. Sister Magdalena. Wisps of smoke escape from her nostrils. Relief surges through me. Sister Magdalena was your mother? She's someone's mother. With the whole cloistered thing, I could never get close to her. That last year, I saw someone walking through the halls one night. I thought it was her. I followed her and ended up in the library. It was Reverend Mother. She was sat in front of the fireplace at the time. She was looking up at that tapestry that I'd brought, the Black Madonna. She looked kind of mesmerised by it. I sat with her and we talked. I told her about the magazine article and how it led me to them. She knew what I was talking about right away. She said the article had been a big mistake. She'd agreed to be involved, along with a few other convents, hoping any attention they got might help them raise funds for maintenance. But she felt the journalists had taken advantage. They focused too much on Sister Magdalene and made it seem like St. Teresa's convent existed solely for this purpose, which wasn't the case. Sister Magdalene's experience had been an anomaly. The magazine had also included a philosophy of faith as an insert without Reverend Mother's consent. She'd pretty much forgotten that she'd written it, and the contents caused a lot of controversy amongst the heads of the diocese council. It was after that article that Sister Magdalena became cloistered. Reverend Mother nearly lost her position at St. Teresa's. I told her about my adoption, and she said, if I was looking for my mother at St. Teresa's, I had the wrong convent. She said I had to come to terms with things myself. Otherwise, finding my birth mother would probably make things worse. Some convents might not have accepted Sister Magdalene because of her past. But Reverend Mother's book was all about, it was sort of like a Josephine Baker's Rainbow Tribe, only with religion. She tried to include different identities and different ways of seeing things and knowing them. The way you were talking about souls and spirits before, the difference between them, that's her bag right there. You open your mouth and you can just see that you're her child. I jump into correct Melia to say that the soul-spirit distinction is a can and not Christian, and that I learnt that from Mammy Ya and not Reverend Mother. But the fact that she calls me Reverend Mother's child throws me off. I want to say I'm not hers, I was never hers. But there's a part of me that's also relieved that someone still thinks I am.
Thank you.
What strikes me about that passage, and we'll take questions in a minute, so start thinking of the questions, is the kind of tension between privacy and secrecy and what gets revealed through paperwork in unexpected places. And I wondered what your sort of, research process was in thinking about an adoptive person often coming to find out their genealogy, if anything, via that.
My process, as I say, was long, and I think this book, like elements of it, started in 2007 when I got an Arts Council grant to go to Accra, to Ghana, to research folklore. And one of the things that I found, so lots of people said that folklore as a culture is dying out because people aren't kind of passing the oral histories in the way that they used to. But I found a question that kind of unlocked a story with everybody that I spoke to. So if I asked anyone if they knew an Anansi story, everybody knew an Anansi story, and everybody could recite an Anansi story. And I also found that there was this rhythm, this kind of beat to the way that they told the story that felt cultural. And my dad's side of our family is Ghanaian, and I felt a loss. I felt like I didn't have that. And I wanted to have that. I wanted to have that in the way that I told stories. So I wanted to try to find a way of capturing it in what I wrote, capturing that sense of rhythm. And I think, for me, adoption is, I suppose, a slightly larger word, the country that adopts you and what you take on because of that and what you lose because of that. And that sense at the end where she feels this really mixed, you know, she doesn't want to belong to it. She's not Reverend Mother's, she's Mammy Ya's, and it's a can, and she's learned about all these new things. But also there's this relief that somebody still thinks she is, and she hasn't completely lost that connection, that there's a real tension with the home you're born into and the home you discover that you're a part of, or the culture that you discover that you're a part of. Your question was also about the other parts of research I've done, so I feel as though I've gone slightly off on a tangent. Lots of my research was conversations with people. I went to Ghana I went to some libraries and to some archives, and actually they were the last places that I found things. It was in talking to people that I discovered things, and in learning about Sunsum, a lot of that, I did find some books here around Sunsum, but a lot of that I got from conversations with my dad. And I found that as a really interesting way of unlocking our shared history, because growing up he never spoke about it. He was too busy kind of surviving, making a life for us, being here. But writing this book, doing the research for this book, asking questions, finding dead ends and finding I couldn't uncover the things that I wanted to, made him open up and made him offer suggestions of places that I could look.
Well, questions. So, we would welcome them from you all. Not every single person, of course. Tina Andrews.
I have never asked you this question before.
Oh,
It
gosh.
occurred to me, I've heard this section that you read, Annie, today a few times, and it struck me like a lightning bolt today. How much of your ability to act have you put into your words? Because you write phenomenal dialogue, and sometimes writers write dialogue that sounds like it has been written by a writer. And then sometimes there are those who write dialogue that sounds like people talk. And your dialogue sounds like people talk. So, though certainly the characters, how they would actually say it. Once you've written a section, and I realize that this question is in 3 parts, please, but once you have finished a section or a chapter or whatever, do you go back and read it aloud, or what do you do? Because it's so real and visceral. What do you do? Because it's great. You write great dialogue. You should be writing movies.
I walk around with her. You know. I very rarely go back. For me, maybe it's because I've been an actor a very long time. I've read and dissected so many plays in writing, in acting. I write. I teach creative writing. There's a something in my brain that gives me the voice, and for me, I spend some time just hearing them. I have to hear the voice, and it has to be. It's different, and I can't tell you how I do it. I just know that I become that character, and I think it's you become the character. And if I'm having 2 or 3 people in the conversation, I can quite easily become all 3 of them. And it's thinking about the cadence of their voice, the kind of words they use. Where do they breathe? Where are they silent? And all those things come into how the dialogue is written. But I love writing dialogue, but then I talk a lot, so it comes, yeah.
Next writer. I was really intrigued in being a person not connected with your book, the person that you're writing about, the background, and what few things could somebody like me reading take away from the book? What were you hoping for?
Ooh.
That's a really good question. It's difficult to answer. So people who've read it that I don't know, who've told me what they think, have come away with very different things. And sometimes people come away with it and I think, oh, that's what you took from that section or that character? And so it sort of surprised me.
So I don't want to take jarring away from it. I want to take more.
Okay. And there's only there's a section that is deliberately jarring, not the entire novel. I think a big question for me in writing this novel was if you take a black person and you put them in a place where they have no connection with a black community or black history, how do they understand themselves? How do they come to understand who they are, their race, their history? and what is that process like? What does it do to their spirit, to their soul? Not in a religious way, in a I suppose in a spiritual way. And that's what I was trying to explore. And so that's what I'm trying to, that's the big question that I'm trying to ask through the book. But I think lots of people can come, there are lots of different answers to that, and in reading it you'll come to an answer that may not have been something that I was intentionally trying.
I was an idea of a sense of wherever this character is, if I was near this character, I would start seeing this person in my community. How could I connect with them and not have such a gap between how I could be, my background, and this person?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. That links slightly to, so there was a question that Deirdre asked about their identities being unsettled. And I think possibly it has something to do with how we see particular people and how we impose our perception of who we think they are and the space that they take, and allowing people to grow into the space that they're in and not trying to box them down. But I don't want to be didactic about it. I think it was a question that was interesting to me, and I explored it, and there were lots of different answers to that.
And so much of the work is like a reverie as well, and I think that's different to like a daydream. If we think of Gaston Bachelard talking about the reverie being like a kind of an axis of which points come off, whereas the daydream is sort of more like that. And I think that's what you offer in the narrative structure very much. And there's a lot of comfort, therefore, in that process, I think.
I've got a question just for Annie about, excuse me, about your characters when they try to intrude. Have any of your characters ever won? Like, you know, when you say the character appears to you,
Yes.
and then you say go away, are they persistent?
Did. and for time when I was writing this, I have two friends who are also writers, and we'd go away twice a year on our own retreat, and we'd be for a week. No radio, no television, nothing. We just write. And then at the end of the day, we have dinner, we exchange things, and then we have dinner. And this day, I was so fed up with this character, I killed him off. And they were furious with me. You can't kill him off. And they were arguing with me about my character. They took me to court. And I had to, they said, you have to justify. And in the end, I had to bring him back because even dead, he was still kicking and kicking. But for me, that's a joy as well. Because it's annoying, like when you have to now go back and sort of try to fix what you hadn't planned. But there's that joy when you open something and you read it that you've written and you think, shit, I wrote that, that's good. Because it just comes, and it's not something that is planned. And they come with their own voice and with their own needs, and then you have to see how they fit into the book. But yes, it can be very annoying, but it's joyful as well.
Good, thank you.
It's just
Yeah.
The scene you write about them in the ship, how did you actually research that? For me, it was so moving. I've never really thought about how it felt for them to be captured and put in a ship. And it kind of made me connect with my ancestors to think that they went through that. I found it really, really very moving. And I just want to know how you managed to actually picture that and to put it into words. It's so powerful.
I think that it's because I got to know the character, and I got to know what she wanted and what the life she'd been leading, and then from things that you read. But I'm one of these people who I research a lot on the internet and that, but I also like to physically go to the place. And I went to the South Carolina, and I went to the Gullah, and I went to some of those plantations, and when you know what that was what they were coming to, and from the other stories that you've read, I became that 14-year-old girl who was feisty, and there was nothing she could do about that situation, but she could observe what was around her, and the pain. I felt her pain. I find it sometimes difficult to read that, because if I get into the character too much, I get very emotional for her. Somebody there.
Yes,
Oh.
and both of you, is it that identity, of course,
Yeah.
which, when you think about it, it runs through everything we read, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah.
where does it come from? Is it about your parents, your background, your family, where you live, what you read, and so on? So, that really came across in both of them. Writing identity is not easy. In fact, it's not easy to even feel identity in a way, is it, sometimes, when you're going through your daily life. So I thought both books showed that very
Thank you.
well. And I enjoyed it. Thank you.
This kind of goes back to Deirdre's first question about form. Juliana, you said you wanted the beginning of the book to be deliberately difficult, and that people had said that, some of the readers had said that, and I was just wondering how you, because that reflected the sort of difficulty of the experience that you were showing, and how do you kind of balance that with, a reader's, limitations or willingness to sort of go through a certain amount of difficulty to get, I don't know, is that in your mind when you're doing it, sort of, how difficult can I make this without losing someone, sort of thing?
Yes, so in terms of thinking about the reader's limitations, my agent asked me to make the whole book in fragments, and I decided not to. Only a small part of the beginning is. And I think that was because I wasn't sure I would keep readers until the end. And also, I wasn't sure I wanted to do that to the text, because in some ways she is broken at various points of her life, and it's constantly trying to find fragments, put some back together that she has had and have been broken. And I wanted to capture that in some way. And also I tried writing this book in many other ways, and it just wasn't working for one reason or another. So the form that it currently takes felt like it made sense for the text. And I don't know about you, but I've been trying to write this several times, and there was just a point when I discovered the form that it would take, where it felt as though the book, it creates its own kind of gravity, or there's a logic to it when you realise the form that it should take, and then other things started to fit in. So for me, there was always going to be that moment that would be difficult, uncomfortable, slightly jarring for a reader. But if they stuck with it, there would be other moments that are easier and that they fly through. And it's just, I think about balancing the light and the dark.
I think that when I write, I tend to overwrite, because if I try to contain it, I feel that the truth isn't coming out, and then I go out and I start cutting out and killing my babies. But they're not quite dead. I put them into another folder. Gone were the days when you rip up the paper and you tear it up and that's it. But the thing is that you had to sort of go through all of it to feel what was the true essence of what I wanted to say and how I wanted the audience, the reader, to feel. So I knew that from the prologue, I wanted them hooked into the pain of the girl, so that when the story starts, they can see both her joy and her pain, especially when they know what is to come. They've been forewarned what is to come for her, and that so even at the moments of joy, you have that thing that you know is coming, and I wanted that tension within the reader at the time. Yeah.
Did you find, writing, when you're writing, and you know it's going to go somewhere else, it's so different from if a 10-year-old writes something, they're writing what they really feel, what they want to say. They're writing about the cat and the rabbits, and in the end the rabbit dies, the cat dies because they're fed up, they want to go out and play, But, when you're writing, it's for an audience. It does kind of restrict. Did you feel that it's kind of restricting what you really wanted to say at any point?
Not for me, because, I mean, was it Toni Morrison who says, if you can't find the book you want to read, then write it yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is a story that's been swirling around with me. I'm from Sierra Leone, and this is a story about Sarah Forbes Bonetta that has been waving around my family and people because Sarah went to Sierra Leone, she went to school there. But we never quite believed it, and so when I started finding out about Sarah, I was able to sort of reflect on the sort of stories that I'd heard and what did that mean. And it was also to the curiosity that our stories, some of those important stories, are not being told. So I wanted to say that, and it had to be as truthful for that part of it as it was possible. So I did a lot of research on the newspapers and things to find out what was the essence of her. But in fact, that did not help that much, because it was just the same story that was put out every time, and you had to sort of search. In the end, I sort of spoke to some of her descendants, and I know one of her descendants is a family uncle, in the black sense that he's not blood relative, but he's always been there. So I was able to talk to him, and I met Sarah's great-great-great-grandson, and he was able to show me artifacts of things that Queen Victoria had sent for Sarah's daughter and things like that. Made it really easy to get into it and say I'm writing it for myself, but also for people to know what was there, that there were many stories about us long before Windrush, you know.
Sorry, I was just going to answer that question really quickly. For me, I think I had kind of two things in mind. So I didn't know if it would ever get published. So I did have an audience in mind, but I didn't know whether it would ever reach an audience. And also one of the kind of the early longings and reasons for trying to write this book was that as a young reader, I read books about children like frolicking in the countryside, having these adventures in rural landscapes, and I never saw anyone that looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to write something that put a young black woman in the countryside, and she felt at home, and she swims and she climbs. I don't do any of these things, and I grew up in the city, but I wanted to read something like that. So I think this was the book that I had to get out of myself to allow me to write other things. So I had that with me in writing it.
Well, from one extraordinary Amazon figure of Toni Morrison to the late Bell Hooks, just to leave us with, no black woman writer in this culture can write too much. Indeed, no woman writer can write too much. No woman has ever written enough. So thank you both very much. Anni Domingo.